I'm Thomas M Copeland. Welcome to the Big Break Pod. All right, welcome to the Big Break. So again, I'm Thomas M Copeland, and I am the creator and host of this show. And I'm going to use this first episode to talk a little bit about what the show is about and why I think you want to tune into it today and going forward. And so really, let's just start there. So I first and foremost am really a lifelong listener, learner, reader, writer, and I am immediately involved in things that capture my interest from a creative perspective. So, I mean, you might be like me if you're listening to this. You might be the type that goes into a museum and wants to see, every exhibit in the museum, no matter how big it is. I mean, I spent every hour I could in the Louvre in Paris when I was there because I just want to take it all in. So maybe you're a lot like me. Maybe you sort of approach everything in your life as an interest first and foremost and a learning opportunity. And so that's really me. Now, why this podcast is about acting and the business of show business is because I always thought if I was going to create a show, I would create something that I can't find anywhere else. So I've been thinking about podcasts for a very long time. I've been thinking about doing my own show for a very long time. I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts for a very long time, mostly business podcasts. But I've often thought that there isn't a show out there that really gets into the nitty-gritty of what it means to think of your creative passions as a business, as a profession, and as a career. So that's really what this show is kind of all about. I'm going to really be exploring the business of acting, the business of show business, the business and financials and decision-making and production behind filmmaking, short films, feature films, series. And really, the most maybe exciting part about it is not that I'm going to drone on every episode by myself, but actually that we're going to be bringing on some really incredible guests. I'm really excited for the guest lineup that we've already have. Today's first episode is going to have a guest that I think you'll be really excited about, that I'm really excited to present, that I'll talk about in a minute. But also, we're going to be having Emmy-award-winning producers, filmmakers, writers. We've got casting directors signed up for it. We've got local filmmakers out of Miami who have won awards in films out of the Miami Film Festival. We've got other filmmakers from West Palm Beach and beyond, and really even dipping into some voices that are outside of our market here in Miami as well, looking into voices coming out of LA, Albuquerque, Atlanta, and New York specifically. So we've got some really great guests lined up that are going to kind of turn over the rock, so to speak, of sort of what is the business of acting, what is the business of creativity. And so that's what I'm really most excited about, I think. One thing I also want to say up front is that why this podcast is happening now and why it's so crucial to happen now. There's a really interesting quote about Hollywood, which is that the only constant in Hollywood is change. Ever since its inception in the 1910s, 1920s, leading up into the golden age and leading up into silent film era and beyond, the only thing that's really been true is that Hollywood constantly changes. And so my guest that's going to be joining us today, we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we're also going to talk about that in the future as well. It's just change. So it's not good. It's not bad. I mean, I guess you could argue it's bad in some ways, it's good in others. Certainly people have profited mightily off of change in Hollywood, and people have lost off of change in Hollywood. So it's good or bad relative to your position in the industry. But change itself is not good or bad. Change is just change. And in fact, change begets opportunity, in my opinion. So in this age of technology, AI, questions about who owns content that are used in the generation of AI and the modeling of AI, questions about streaming and web series and where that's going, consumption, distribution. These are all incredibly fluid moments, incredibly fluid aspects of Hollywood and of filmmaking in general, and really any major market. And so I really want to use this podcast to talk to people who can help us dissect that and understand those changes. Why? So we could see the opportunities. And so hopefully you and me, we can see our big break right up ahead, right around the curb. That's really what this podcast is all about. So one thing I also want to say up front is that the only thing that's constant in Hollywood is change, right? And you can argue whether change is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective and sort of whether you've profited from that change or whether you've lost from that change, because certainly there's no end to stories on both sides of that equation. But ever since the 1910s, 20s, 30s, right into the Gilded Age, into the silent movie age and beyond, the only constant in Hollywood is change, right? And so the way that I think about change is I don't think about it as being good or bad. I think about it as being an opportunity. And I want you to be thinking about that as well. We are surrounded by opportunities in this day and age with technological advances. I'm a bit of a technophile, so I might get into the weeds on this stuff a little bit. If you're interested in it, I hope you join me. But if we look at things like generative AI and questions that generative AI now raises about who owns the content, who owns the copyright, who owns their voice, who doesn't own their voice, what rights does a AI startup have in essentially just hoovering up data and hoovering up your content that you've created in order to feed their model? Who owns that? Who's compensated for that? How are they compensated for that? These are all questions that, of course, SAG-AFTRA is dealing with and many other unions are dealing with as well. And many artists are really scared of, and rightly so. It's worth being considerate of this technology and understanding this technology and understanding the impacts of the technology. But the technology itself is just a change, and therefore there's opportunity in it. So put aside AI for the moment when we talk about things like distribution, streaming services, the change of Hollywood from the days when actors could stand outside the gates and wave a piece of paper to get noticed and get cast, right up until, the advent of home video, to DVD, to the internet, and then to streaming. These are all moments of drastic change in the industry. And I'm just a firm believer that change is neither good nor bad. It's really just an opportunity. And that's what I hope to dig into in depth with this series and this show, especially in season 1. So a little bit about me and sort of why I'm doing this and why I'm, I guess, qualified, or at least putting myself up as being qualified enough to do this, and why you should listen, is that I have a story that I'll take a couple of moments to just kind of tell. And so this really just goes back to who I am and sort of how I've been shaped into who I am today. So I come from a middle-class home. My parents were real estate brokers. And my brother and I grew up not wanting for anything, but, they worked a lot. And so we were always encouraged to sort of lead our own passions and creativity. So my brother and I were very interested in sort of commercials and filmmaking very early on. But I was a terrible student. I did awful in high school. I did awful in college as well. And I never really took to, the foundations of, I guess, established education. I found all the subject interesting. I just hated homework and I hated tests, and I was always terrible at tests and quizzes, so I did terrible at school. Anyway, so fast forward, and what that meant when I graduated college from UF in about 2008, 2010, somewhere in there, what that meant is that it was at a time when jobs were really hard to find, right? We had the global financial crisis of that time, so jobs were difficult to find. So I ended up just sort of creating my own websites and learning how the internet works and learning how hosting works and learning tools like WordPress and some other sort of easy to make website tooling. And I kind of figured out that if I can get good enough at making something look pretty on the internet, that I can walk up to, the gym or the corner store or, the little mom and pop restaurant up the street, and I could sell them a website. And that's exactly what I did. And that took a little while to get going, but eventually it did get going. And what that led to was sort of a career, a job, I would say, that led to a career in marketing, online advertising, SEO, pay-per-click, and all of that ties into one particular skill set that I've always had, which is writing. I've always been a really good writer. I always excelled in English. I always excelled in the spoken word. And so I was able to parlay being able to write creatively and write informatively and persuasively into dollars. I could convince businesses to let me write blogs and blog posts for them, and they would pay me for it. So I did that for a very long time. And after a couple of years, that caught the attention of a friend and mentor who was a lawyer in a law firm who was one of my clients, who eventually convinced me to leave that freelancing side and join him in his law firm and help him grow his marketing department. And I did. And I did that for about 8 years. And after 8 years, I realized that there was some other opportunities in the space of legal tech and services that I could branch into, which was essentially software development and design, because those were skills I built over the years, and product design for essentially software that allows lawyers to do their job better, right? That's basically it. And so I saw an opportunity there, started a company, and that was in about 2021. And I started that company. That company's been doing very well ever since then. So it affords me the time and ability to be able to come into a studio and do this kind of a thing, and sort of relay my experiences through the years and really kind of put them through the lens of everything we've been talking about so far, the business side of creativity. The truth is, I don't have, and I may have people who hear this and they're like, what? But I don't have any passion in legal services. Legal services is an industry that has a need. It's got a supply and a demand, right? There's a demand, and we're a company that supplies it. And that's kind of how I think about it. My true passion really lies in writing, creative writing, filmmaking, script writing, series writing, playwriting, and acting and performing in plays, film, TV. And so what happened in 2019-ish is something did happen, which is that I saw a film that you'll know called The Greatest Showman. And I saw, and I just watched this thing play out on the TV, and I was amazed by it. I mean, blown away by it. Particularly because I saw Zac Efron do a song and a dance, and I thought, shit, if he can do it, I can do that. So literally, I said that to myself, as insane as that sounds. And I looked up online, probably Facebook or something, sort of like, what's my local theater? And I found the Lake Worth Playhouse was a local theater. It's where I was living at the time, where I owned a home in Lake Worth Beach at the time. And they had a casting coming up for an open casting call for Footloose, the musical, for their summer opener. This is like their biggest show of the year, apparently, is in the summer. It's like their season opener. So I went and I sang the song that Zac Efron sang for 16 bars. And I did this weird little dance I made up. And I was immediately cast. I was cast that night for the role of Chuck Cranston, who's the bad guy, the bad boyfriend in Footloose, the musical. So I did that show for the next 12 weeks. Maybe it wasn't 12 weeks. I think we did 21 shows in something like 3 weeks, plus the rehearsal time. But I absolutely loved it. I loved every second of it. I loved every moment of it. It was community theater, so I wasn't paid, didn't care. It was just incredible. And I was at home. I mean, I was at home on stage. And I have to say, if you're out there listening right now and you're interested in acting, you're interested in performing, you're interested in creating something that others will see and go, wow, that is really cool. I have to tell you, and we'll talk more about this in later seasons and later episodes, but the best thing you can do is go find your local community theater and do something. You don't have to get cast right away like I did. Just get in, get on set, get on the stage, do something. And you will find out very quickly if you love it or don't love it. But I will say, for those that actually want to be on stage, there is no greater exhilaration or feeling in the world than a closing curtain. And if you're out there and you're listening and you know that feeling, then you know. And if you want to learn and experience that feeling, then stick with us, because I'd love to help you get there. So what does that mean? What's the point of all this? The point of all this is that I think that I bring a unique perspective to the topic of the business of show business and the topic of creative performance, because I'm an entrepreneur, because I have entrepreneurial experience. The interesting thing about entrepreneurs is that we see the world through a different lens. So entrepreneurs see the world through a lens of risk and reward. It's really that simple. We are typically high risk tolerance people. You have to be to start a business, obviously, because you got to put capital in. You've got to hire people. You got to know what you're doing. You got to create sales. You got to create business. And you got to manage those people and make sure things get fulfilled. So obviously there's a lot of risk in that. Most people don't have that. I can talk throughout this series. You're going to hear me talk about how I can get you there. I can help you get to that mindset to be able to take those risks. It's a skill. It's a muscle. It's a muscle you work out and build. So we're going to talk about that. But the point is, as an entrepreneur, I bring that perspective to all of these conversations of how do I break in as an actor? How do I get my first SAG-E eligibility? How do I budget for being an actor? How do I pick the right classes? Where do I start? There's going to be a lot of topics that are really designed for what I'm going to call baby actors. It's not a derogative term at all. It's just if you're new and you haven't done much, I'm going to call you a baby actor. And so we have a lot of content coming up and a lot of topics and guests coming up on baby actors. But for those who have been on stage, you've been on set, you've got a decent resume, maybe you've got some decent credits, maybe you've even got better credits than I do, because I have pretty good resume, but I certainly don't have like any network shows. So maybe you've got even further in your career than I have on this. We're going to have topics for you as well. And what we're going to be talking a lot about is the long-term game, right? After you've had that first network or recurring role, fantastic, that's awesome. What happens over the next 6 months if that's a pinnacle and things start feeling like they're on a downslide? We're going to talk a lot about how to be resilient and how to think of this as not a sprint, but a marathon. This is truly a marathon career. If you're serious about doing this, and you're starting to build some credits, good for you. That's fantastic. That's this much in a career that could be this long, you know? So we're going to talk a lot about how to keep that perspective and how to keep persistence. And in order to keep persistence, you've got to make money. So how do you make money? We're going to talk a lot about that as well. So with that, we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk to our first guest here for episode 1. And I'm so excited for our guest number 1. He is somebody that's known me. I'll just give you one clue. He's somebody that's known me my entire life. That's right. We're bringing in my brother, Emmy-award winning producer, Kris Eber. We'll be talking to him in just a couple minutes. Stick around.
If you're an actor serious about your craft, then you know you're serious about improving your read, your presentation, and your on-camera delivery. And there's no faster way to sharpen your skills than with detailed collaborative feedback from your fellow actors, directors, casting directors, coaches, and other creative professionals in the industry. So, how do you get in front of the people you need to impress? With Show Coach. Available for Apple and Android, this exciting app gives you a stage to showcase your work, including self-tapes, reels, and monologues, specifically to solicit feedback from the professionals who can hire you. And for a limited time, Show Coach is absolutely free to use. Industry professionals can apply to become a coach and earn money for critiquing student posts. Download the app as a student or coach from your mobile app store or visit showcoach.app. That's showcoach.app to learn more. Show Coach, artists encouraging greatness.
All right, well, welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of The Big Break with my guest, my brother, my real-life blood brother, joining us from his home in L.A. Thanks so much for joining us. Kris Eber, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You seem thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to be here, absolutely. You said, yeah, I'm very happy to join you. I'm excited.
Glad to have you here, man. Thanks for joining. I think I heard you come off of a hike this morning. Is that right? Coming in from a hike a little earlier this morning?
Yeah. Nearing 50. And doctors are telling me I need to move more. So that's the haps. Yeah, so trying to hike every weekend. I'm sure we'll touch on this throughout our conversations, but, work is pretty all-encompassing. I average 12 to 15-hour days regularly. So it's tough to stay healthy during those times. And that's something that we can certainly touch on. But, bad habits form, and sometimes you miss meals. Sometimes you're eating at odd hours. So trying to do what I can on my weekends to get out and move. Yeah. So I hike Saturday and Sunday mornings, usually with friends or colleagues. That's a very common thing. This morning I hiked with the owner of a post-production sound facility. It's a good way to stay social and keep up with people when, lunches and dinners and drinks are much more difficult when I'm in production.
Yeah. Are you at a desk most days in production, or are you wandering around the set, a little bit of both, or really neither?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm there generally a half hour before call, and I'm there a half hour to an hour after wrap. I'm on set. When we're on location, I work out of a trailer and go to and from set. And then when we're at stage, my offices historically are attached to the stage or near the stage. So I go back and forth.
Sounds like you can get some movement with that, moving around the set. But
Oh,
I'd imagine,
sure. No,
but I'd
I
also
do,
imagine as a
I
producer,
certainly do my
you're
steps
probably
or whatnot, but something more organized. And again, I'm sure, we can touch on all these things, but my job is, I kind of have two jobs. I have a job of what's going on today, but then I have a responsibility to what's going on tomorrow and later in the schedule. So, I'm working hard to lay the track so that the train never slows down.
Yeah.
So I'm popping back and forth between set and my office.
And before we get started, just checking to see if old habits die hard.
Yeah.
Do you have some water with you next to you? You got you hydrated?
I do have some water.
Yeah.
I realize we've kind of jumped into this. I don't know if there'll be an introduction beyond the fact that I'm your brother, but maybe for context, what I do.
Yeah, let's get into that. So, and stop talking about hiking. Let's actually get into the meat and potatoes. So, you are my older brother, for context. We go way back, believe it or not. I mean, as long as I've been alive, and maybe I think for the first 9 years of your life I wasn't around, but after that I was around. So there's some context there.
Yeah.
We both grew up.
That was the peak. That was when it was best for me.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah. Having both grown up
somehow, the number of kids in the house doubled.
Yeah, that's right. And growing up in Jupiter, Florida, but you, I will always remember very clearly, left for college pretty early on. I think you may have left at around 20 years old or so, and that would have been, I mean, I don't know how early that is, but that would have been early in my life, right? So I was about 12, I think,
sure.
11 or 12
Yep.
when you headed out. And then you really never came back. You went to college, and I'll let you tell the story, but you went off to school.
Sure.
And after that, you went out to California. I'll let you tell the interesting part of that. And then sort of never came back to Florida. So what today's first episode is really all about is that I've been spending this episode just kind of talking about me and sort of my careers and my professional journey, both in the arts, in creative efforts that were mostly passions up to this point. A lot of writing, a lot of acting, but really on a passion level, so to speak. And so that's been shifting these last couple of years. And so this podcast is happening at a time when that shift is actively happening. I'm actively shifting into turning my passions into an actual profession and an actual career, and kind of more or less documenting it here. And that's kind of the idea. But you did this shift and this journey much earlier in your life than I'm doing it now at 39 years old. So I've taken a long and winding journey to this point, and that's going to be documented to the podcast. But because you did yours early in life, maybe that's a good place to start. Let's talk a little bit about sort of maybe a good question to ask is when you knew for sure that you knew what you wanted to do in life.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the benefit of hindsight is to kind of see the investment that the state of Florida made into the arts in the late 80s. I think there's all these touch points that I can draw back to kind of this decision that was made, certainly without any of my real understanding at the time. But in the late 80s, when I was, 10, 11 years old, the state started passing some pretty significant investments in the arts. They were building, Florida is a relatively young state, all joking aside about retirement and the elderly and such. But in reality, when it comes to arts, the state really didn't have many metropolitan centers that had any of that stuff. And where we grew up in Palm Beach County, we saw this huge investment that was made in the form of dinner theaters that were being built through tax subsidies. Ultimately, there was a performing arts school that was built when I was in sixth grade that I attended. And through that, that helped cultivate, that had an audition process, and you went into a specialty. In my case, it was theater. So that helped me introduce me not only to, acting, but also stagecraft and production and the idea of businesses that support the arts. That was something that was pretty I was pretty oblivious to
Mm.
prior to going to the Palm Beach County School of the Arts. And then, but at that same time, what's incredible is now as you go further in my career and you look backwards on those investments that were made, at the same time, Florida State University was building the first film school in the state, which has, since its inception, been a world-class film education facility that ultimately became my alma mater. So there's these interesting, and with that, Universal Studios is being built, MGM Studios is being built, sound stages are coming to Orlando, Panavision moves to Orlando, JL Fisher, one of the premier grip support companies, is moving to Orlando. So these things are all happening in my early teens. So again, I didn't have that appreciation of what was happening, but I was very fortunate to be at that time. So art school, at seventh grade, that led to starting to audition for local productions that are going on, volunteering at the local dinner theater, which was owned by Burt Reynolds, which brought a certain amount of celebrity to Jupiter, where we grew up, and as a result, plays would come through there, and national level acts would come through there, and I was volunteering all through my early teens. I would ride my bike over there and help out, or I would take summer camp classes, for acting and whatnot.
Kris, would that have been what is today the Maltz Theater?
Yes, yeah. Prior to that, it was the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater, and then when he sold that, he opened an institute. It was called BRIT. It was the Burt Reynolds Institute for Theater Training, and I spent as much time there as I could. Like you find this sense of community, and you find other people who are kind of into the things that you are. And the fact that I was going to a performing arts school at that time meant that even my classmates were also doing these things. So there was a real sense of community, which is something that I've always loved about this, right? This career, you kind of can't do it on your own. You can go and paint a picture, you can go and, play a piece of music on the piano or whatnot, but I can't go off and get what's in my head out without the help of other really talented artists and crafts people. So that was something that really attracted me to the business very, very early on, the camaraderie and the community that came from that. So it was, to kind of fast forward, but, around that time, around 12, I started auditioning and landing national commercial spots that were being filmed in Miami and Orlando. We had very supportive parents and extended family. I mean, our Uncle Bob would drive me to auditions in Miami.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's funny.
Yeah, because he was operating a taxi at the time, and he kind of was off during the day and worked late nights and stuff, and he was always really supportive. So, those things all led to ultimately me joining SAG at 12, and then doing a number of national campaigns and a number of television campaigns. At that time, Nickelodeon and Viacom moved all of their live action production to Orlando. So I was benefiting from all these things that felt very normal, but in fact were all really, really new. It was years later that I could put that all together.
Let me ask you something. Was that at this time, was Florida one of the first or one of the earliest states to start making these kinds of tax incentive based legislatures? Was Florida one of the...
I can't speak to the order of things because I was so young, but I can say that, historically, as I look back, and there's all of these places, the success that Atlanta has had has been sustained undeniably, but we can go backwards in time outside of LA and New York and Chicago, which had a very, very big industry. And we can talk a little bit more. There's a union contract called the Area Standards Agreement, the ASA, which incentivizes production elsewhere in the country, but it excludes Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. These were production centers for some time. And, you see productions like Oprah, coming out of Chicago, and then ultimately the Batman movies are filmed there. And there's a lot of other stuff that kind of, is building a huge infrastructure. But Chicago is relatively dead today by today's standards, right? And when you go beyond Atlanta and you go back before Atlanta, it was, New Orleans. Before New Orleans, it was Charleston. Before Charleston, it was Detroit. Before Detroit, it was Orlando. Orlando and Miami were kind of the premier places. Florida's a right to work state, and that incentivizes productions to come. And I think after Atlanta, it's going to be Albuquerque and Omaha. These are two burgeoning areas that have aggressive incentivization that are in right now, and we're seeing huge investments. Right now Los Angeles is famously very slow, but Albuquerque has 10 productions going on today. So and we're seeing Netflix has made a huge investment in building a new studio there. I mean, this is some time old, but certainly in the last few years.
Yeah, it's almost like its own.
Just to say that.
Yeah, almost like its own episode of sort of where is production moving outside of LA, and where are things moving, and why should you consider some of those other places. We still see questions in subreddit by what I call baby actors who sort of want to get into it and want to learn more. We still see those Reddit questions of should I move to LA or not, and I'm like no. And there's a lot of people that are starting to say no as well. So that's almost its whole episode.
Sure.
I'm curious if you didn't have another thought to finish that last one. That's actually an interesting segue, because as the entertainment industry is kind of changing, what you're really laying out is that you were born at a time and a place that was almost serendipitous in terms of sort of the opportunities that you had and the access to Miami that you had. And by the way, Miami's still a huge production center for commercials. I was in a national commercial last year myself, so it's still big for that. But as this industry is changing, and you look back and you're kind of looking back on this, do you think that same path could have been followed? You personally, let's say you were born in Omaha, Nebraska. Let's say we were born in Omaha, Nebraska, and those film incentives were not there. What do you think, just as a fun kind of exercise, what do you think, that path may have taken? Do you feel like in your bones you still would have found theater, still would have found that local theater, still would have followed it? I mean, I'm just curious where your head goes if you ever think about that.
Yeah. I would think probably not. I mean, in some ways I was fortunate to get introduced to an industry at a young age that inspired excitement and passion and a desire and seemingly a feeling of like never ending growth, that every week there was another audition, every day there was a new project. It felt really an exciting time, and I still have that now. I love talking to friends who have landed a new job or starting a new endeavor, and that continues. So I think the key that would be that, growing up elsewhere, and again, I mean, yes, Miami is there's still work going on there, and there's work going on all over the country. I mean, I don't mean to imply there's things that are happening on a local level, be it local advertising for local businesses, all the way up to national broadcast work, and everything in between. It's simply to say that I think had I grown up elsewhere at a different time, I don't know that I would have even known this was a career. I'm the father, I have an 11-year-old, and a lot of what we talk about is that, you can trace his passions to a job, and some of them are very obvious. He loves soccer. Okay, I understand you can be a soccer player, but there's a whole industry that supports soccer. And, there's, if that's what your passion lies in, you could be an agent, you could be a manager, you could run a sports restaurant that specializes in soccer, whatever that thing is, you can turn that passion into a career. So I was fortunate that I was introduced to two things at a very young age: an industry that I was fascinated by, and a passion for the idea that it could be a job. And when you are 12 and 13 years old and you're making, money that, this is the same money, that 13-year-old SAG actor is getting the same day rate as, the person who's playing my dad or my mom or whatever, meaning to say it was a large amount of money for a 13-year-old. So now, the wheels start turning and you're like, wait a second, I can make a career out of this, and I could do something with it. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think I would have to say no. I imagine, any one of these pieces of this serendipitous puzzle not fitting together at that time. And, I'd be doing something completely different. But it started that path, right? I mean, that's the thing that just to take us all the way to today is, that journey was started and then it was completed with film school, through film school. And we can talk about this, but through film school, I made connections both professionally and personally. And, and then that's started the career. And then once you have a job, you start building upon those foundations. So, there's a direct through line from like some governor in Florida in the 80s to where I am today.
Lawton
which is
Childs,
me,
maybe. I don't know if I know
I
don't know if I know my government history, but maybe Lawton Childs was around that time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
probably around that time. Yeah.
I think that there's an interesting takeaway in that, which is that if it is really just about like some level of serendipitous luck and sort of where you're at and who you're supported by your family and sort of the opportunities that are within your grasp of an hour and a half drive away, whatever, right? And then just like your passion on top of all that, that can all swirl together, and you can create something out of that that moves your passion or career a little bit, or I guess moves your passion towards a career a little bit more. And that can happen at any time. It just happened for you young, which is interesting, right? I mean,
yeah.
If the story, I think the story you're telling is a story of, it can happen at any time. It just happened to happen to you when you were younger, which is really interesting. Would you, just to start to kind of wrap this part up, would you have done anything differently, do you think, if you look back on it? Everybody's sort of, hindsight is 20/20, and everybody's sort of got some things that, they regret or whatever, not necessarily regrets, but I mean, is there anything that you think you would have done differently looking back now today?
I don't know. I mean, where my mind goes immediately is that idea of kind of getting painted into a box, which is a convenient thing that this industry does. And I think actors see this all the time, that breaking someone's perception of who you are or who you can be, either because of their own subconscious preconceived notions or an example of what you've done already, that's something that has, I don't want to say plagued me through my career, because that certainly isn't reflective of how it's benefited me as well, right? But I will say I've always felt like my skill set is incredibly transferable throughout the industry. But you meet people and there's confusion as to who are you, what do you do, and that's all you do, right? And in my case, it's things like, oh, I'm a half-hour comedy producer, right? That's what I do. And in some ways, that's absolutely my passion and where I want to work and where I focus my work. But if I have any regrets, it's more about trying to diversify earlier to show the industry that I could kind of do a little bit of everything. So there's whole things that, I've always had a passion for multicam comedy, the classic, Friends shot in front of a live studio audience, or Seinfeld or something like that. And this is a little out of touch because multicam comedies are really on the decline and have been for many, many years. There's, at a time where it used to be that from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, every network was airing 4 multicam comedies. And today, you'll find just a handful of them still being made.
Yeah.
The industry has transitioned into something else, which is primarily single cam comedy, which is how I make my living. But I've always had a passion for multicam, and I've always wanted to have done a multicam, if that makes any sense. So my regrets are not, I'm sure we could list 1,000 specific regrets or small regrets, but globally, I feel like in hindsight, the moves that I made have brought me here to where I am. And so I don't, so regret isn't something that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah.
It's, even if there could have been other bifurcations of choices or paths that would have led me to a different outcome or something like that, I don't know. I don't see a lot of value in spending much time in that.
Sure. Well,
there's definitely jobs that got away, if that makes sense. There's I really wanted to do that one, or but it didn't work out for one reason or another, or something. Yeah.
Well, sorry, not so much regrets, but the idea behind diversifying early is a really interesting take. Yeah, so diversifying early in your career is a really interesting thing to take away from your experience there. I find myself having that problem right now. I keep getting, so I can't get cast as a dad. I think I'm too young to look like a dad, but I keep getting cast as a CEO, an executive in a suit, which is ironic because I'm actually that in real life, which is kind of funny. So, I keep getting cast on that. And I think about that a lot. Almost every time I'm on set, I'm thankful to be on set in this role. I just came back from 2 weeks in Atlanta, actually, last week, where I was a CEO in a project. And I flew back, went to another project in Miami where I was an executive in a boardroom. And I think it was that second one that I did the next day that I was like, I wonder if I'm getting typecast right now. But, there's not much I could do. I can be thankful for it, thankful for the work, thankful for the opportunity, and then just keep applying to some other things and just keep in mind to keep trying to apply for other things and keep trying to stretch those opportunities and stretch those wings.
Yeah. I mean, what you're touching on is a crux of this. This is a business first, right? And the reality is while there are creative elements and creative outlets, the truth of the matter is that the industry is largely uncreative in what it does, right? So to me, it's no surprise that you who is doing this kind of double life or this moonlighting thing where by day you're an actual CEO and by night you're playing a CEO on TV. That's no surprise to me because this industry, we're not that creative, you know what I mean? And all of this is a part of the experience that you bring into the audition, you bring into the casting call. You're coming in there with a confidence that you know who this guy is, who this character is, you know what makes them tick. And then you exude that in your performance, and then that's successful. People see that and go, wow, he really feels like a CEO, But it's just this kind of snake eating its tail where those things are true. You say you can't play a dad, or maybe you feel like you're a little too young to be a dad, and maybe that's true. But you have a family and you are a dad, and that will start to become part of who you exude in these moments. And I'm talking about off camera, I'm talking about between takes, I'm talking about, and then others will start to see you as a dad because they know your relationship with your daughter. And so all of these things are they're very entwined where you're putting this thing out into the universe. I mean, we talk about it all the time. I don't know who originally said it, but I love that idea that the camera sees behind it, right? And the idea is that the energy that's on set is being reflected into the camera through oftentimes the performances, through the exhibition of the art, whether it be the set dressing, the architecture, the costumes. The energy, everything that's going on behind the camera is being photographed, not in a literal way, So that's happening in your performances as well, and in your audition. So I guess I mean to say that it doesn't surprise me because once again, what we're talking about here is the business's difficulty of seeing you as something different because you're presenting as what they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And that happens at every level, right? So making a switch from one part of the business, whether it be genre, I'm primarily a TV guy, I want to do features. Well, that's a hard shift to make. Or I'm a dolly grip and I really want to do sound. Things happen where now you're invested, you're in a union, you're paying towards a pension, your contacts and your Rolodex are all in one area of the business, and it's difficult to break over. So in order to do that, I think it takes a monumental change like you're embarking on right now, which is saying I'm going to, stop doing this and start doing that. And I think that you have to do that a few times, certainly in this business, if you want to change how the business sees you.
Brilliant. And we'll have to hold that thought because that's a whole other conversation. I was just on set also with the producers there were also actors. And I thought it was really interesting that they're acting as UPMs and line producers in the meantime while they're also pursuing acting. I thought that was always interesting because I always see those as two different things, but that's a whole other conversation. Well, thank you for this chat. We're going to cut it off here, but we have so much more to get to in the coming weeks and months. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll continue to join me on this show. Not just because it's a good show, but because maybe you're my brother. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll just pull that card out. You're my brother, so you're going to have to be here more often. Anyway.
It's my pleasure, and play that card anytime.
Will do. Thanks, Kris. All right, so as we sort of wrap up episode 1 here, I want to leave you with 4 things that I have learned since 2019 as an actor, on stage, as a writer, as a creative individual, and as an entrepreneur. And these 4 things, I'm going to kind of just rifle through them and chat through them as I have been this whole time. But I think we're going to come back to these 4 points various times throughout really our season 1 and really beyond, because these are like crucial, these are your crucial columns for which the foundation of your career and creativity is going to last, whether it be acting or anything else, I truly believe. So let me lay these 4 on you. First and foremost, and these are probably in order of importance, I would say, but first and foremost, it takes money to make it in any sort of creative business. Point blank, period, bar none. That's it. That's it. So whether you are struggling to, get your first gig or your next gig, your next casting, if you're, sort of struggling to make it, and I don't mean make it big, I mean just make it, just make rent next month, pay your groceries and gas bills. The bottom line is it takes money. So you have to plan in terms of your money at all aspects and through all sort of parts of your life. You have to think about how money impacts your everyday. So there's a lot of talk out there about, the gig economy and sort of what you could be doing that keeps your table fed with food, right? Keeps your lights on, keeps your rent paid, but also allows you the time to go out and chase your creative passions, whatever they may be. So you want to be spending a lot of time thinking about that. If you're working in corporate, if you're working a career, it's really unlikely that you're going to be able to ever find the time to do those things. I will tell you from personal experience that since 2019, I have been trying to work full-time on my creative career, and I haven't been able to do it up to this point. And I'm the boss. So I'm the guy who owns the company, who, tells people what to do every day. And so, not to overstate it, but if I couldn't make it work until now, that should say something about sort of where you're at. So I don't mean to say this to discourage you. I mean to say this to think critically about how you're spending your time every day. And is it really serving your creative passions and careers? If you don't care to turn your creative passions into a career and you enjoy doing acting or filmmaking or whatever on the side, that's great, because what we're going to also talk about later throughout the series is success and what success means or doesn't mean, right? It's all defined by you. I know a lot of people who just make films in their off time on the weekends, and they are some of the happiest people I've ever met. And that's great. That's successful for them. They may not necessarily see those films, hit a major theater, but they don't care to, because that's not how they define success. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But the bottom line is you need money to make it in show business, point blank. So think about that, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Number 2, it takes courage to stand out as an actor and work in the industry. So I'm going to cite a quick example, and we're going to actually hear the story when we bring on one of my guests. But when it came time after that show in 2019 at Footloose, I did a few more shows at Neighborhood Playhouse, and one of the biggest shows I ever did was post-COVID for a little show in a black box type theater, and that was a play by Yasmin Ray, and the name of it is escaping me. I should have probably written this down before I started talking, but anyway, it'll come to me. So we did this show, and it was time for me to get an agent. And so I thought, what's the best way to get an agent's attention? Why don't I just go Google all of the casting agents that are around? Let me just Google them all, put them in a spreadsheet, and I'm just going to reserve 2 tickets for a Saturday night, and I'm going to set them aside, and I'm going to give them to whatever agent is willing to show up. And I emailed, I think, maybe 8 agents or something, 8 or 10 agents. I got a number of replies back. First of all, I got a number of people who just ignored me, which always happens. But then a few of them got back to me and said, that's great, I can't make it, but let me know how your career goes. And then I got another one that said, I can't make it, but let's schedule a meeting for next week. And then I think I had 2 that actually came, which was really cool. The 2 that came, I was offered representation. The one that couldn't come, but ended up having the meeting with me, is actually my agent today. So we're going to be talking with her later on in the season. We're going to be talking about probably that story a little bit and sort of what she thought about getting this random email for 2 tickets to a show to see this actor who has invited her. But the point of the story is that it worked, right? And so it was thinking outside the box. It was being bold. It's pretty bold to set aside your only 2 tickets that you have a show to, ask agents to be there. And I did, and it worked out. And I want you to be thinking boldly as well. So number 2, takes courage to stand out. Number 3, it's a long, slow marathon. It's not a race. I already touched on this a minute ago, but we're going to be talking about it a lot in the upcoming episodes and seasons. This choice, I would say, the sort of life choice to be an actor, filmmaker, creator, writer, it's truly a marathon, not a race or a sprint. There's a lot of baby actors that I see that will, post on Reddit, or, they'll talk to me on set or whatever. And they'll talk about how they've been discouraged because it's been 6 months. And the reality is that 6 months isn't even enough time to even understand the basics of what acting is. Sanford Meisner, famous acting teacher of the method, famously said that it takes 20 years to become an actor. And you know what? He's right. He's probably right. I mean, it takes years and years of training to get so natural on stage or on camera that you start to get noticed. And then it takes years and years and years of grinding after that to actually get jobs and get gigs and get cast. And then what's going to end up happening is, even when you reach a pinnacle of your career, at some point, it's probably going to, the flow is going to stop, the ebb is going to start, and it's probably going to pull back, and you're going to have to deal with that as a crisis. So this is a marathon. It's not a race. I think of it as a marathon. I think of this as, I'm going to be 40 next year. And if by 80, I'll give myself 40 years. And if by 80, I've created some really cool things that have garnered some attention, and I've been proud of how I've spent those 40 years in this industry, then I'll be happy. And I think you should be thinking that way as well. Last but not least, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but number 4 is that the industry is constantly evolving. That is going to happen forever. It is in constant flux, and there is no end to the number and depth of topics that we can get into about how today's environment makes creating content incredibly difficult. Let's not even mention that this year the Florida legislature, if you're local to Miami, has cut funding entirely for theater groups. There are theater groups that, as early as 2022, as recently as 2022, had $150,000, $175,000 in funding. Last year was cut in half. This year it's 0. That is across the state. So Florida theater is facing a major dilemma right now in this moment, and that's funding from the state that's been cut. Now they have to rely on private donors. Many of them are going to be fine. Some of them won't, but it's a change, right? And so there's opportunity in that change. The unions, union strikes, disagreements over AI and technology and how it works. We've already talked about all that. Those are all just other issues that can all have an effect on this. So number 4 is that the industry is constantly evolving, and you almost have to keep up with it on a week-to-week basis, almost, it feels like. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this show in season 1. We're going to be revisiting all of these topics. We're going to be visiting them in depth from the perspective of understanding that this is a business, okay? It can be a passion, and if that's what you want it to be, that's fantastic. But if you want your passion to be something more than a passion, if you want it to make you money, if you want to get paid for this, if you want to take it seriously in that regard, then you have to start thinking about it as a business, and the business is constantly changing. So look, if you've listened this long, then I hope you'll come back for the next episode. Like I said earlier, we're going to have lots of different guests from lots of different backgrounds, lots of professionals who are coming on here. I'm really excited to be bringing on people, for example, that are the people that hire us actors and hire filmmakers and hire directors. And so I'm really excited about that. And we're going to be delving more deeply into our Ask a Producer segment. We'll be bringing Kris, my brother, back regularly, anytime that we feel like we need to ask him a question. And that really leads me to my ask for you and your homework. I want at least this show to have engagement with you. I don't want to be the only one talking. I want some engagement from y'all. So please write to me. You can reach me on Instagram at bigbreakpod, and you can also just email bigbreakpod@gmail.com. You can find us at bigbreakpod.com and find all of our episodes. We're going to be dropping the entire season all at once, so you'll be able to sort of binge it all. We might leak a little bit here and there, but the goal is to have everything out at once so that you can enjoy it. And that's it for now. We hope to see you back again real soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Hey, Thomas here again. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. The show is better when I get to hear from you. Got a question to ask our producer? Or you got a show idea or a guest I should interview? Maybe you just want to tell me that you love or can't stay on the show. Either way, I want to hear from you. You can reach me at bigbreakpod@gmail.com, and you can find my acting profile at castingtom.com or at castingtom. Big Break Pod is created and hosted by me, Thomas M Copeland. The show is a proud member of the Pod Populi Network. Original music by me. Find the show online at bigbreakpod.com and at bigbreakpod.